When testing resumed in the 60s, I was traveling almost every week. I was either coming here or Los Alamos or the Pacific, someplace, so I was always on the road. Mm-hmm. So moving here was, I first moved to Los Alamos in 1970 and ran the operation there.
Oh my gosh.
And then I became deputy general manager, moved to Vegas. So there I spent my time in Vegas. Mm-hmm. But early in the 60s, I did an experiment at the Test Site, among other things. I traveled there a lot.
Oh, wow.
So, but most of my time was in the Pacific. I spent
really
a lot of time in the Pacific. The group that I was associated with in Los Alamos was J10, and they were involved. They were more interested in high altitude phenomena. So we did a lot of experiments in the Pacific, and Dominic had the high altitude shots were something I participated in. So
just been here, there, and everywhere with.
Oh yeah.
That's incredible. Have you always had an interest with nuclear, atomic science and atomic testing?
Well, when you're working 80 hours a week on the test program, you get involved. When testing resumed, my first activity was, let's see, let me go back a little bit. When I was with EG&G early on, I was hired because it was during a moratorium, and the group that hired me was interested in developing, taking some of the equipment used in the test program and converting it into commercial products, which was not a very successful venture. Turns out not a lot of people wanted traveling wave oscilloscopes back then. So help came along in the form of a Los Alamos scientist, Don Westervelt, and the Vela program. Now the premise of Vela was that those sneaky Russians were going to test it out of space. So we developed, built and deployed worldwide a system that could detect the fluorescence of nitrogen in the atmosphere caused by X-rays from a nuclear explosion in outer space. So we had these deployed around the world. When testing resumed, when the Russian violated the treaty and started testing, there was still interest if they would have a high altitude shot, which was what this was based on. So my first field trip was to Norway, north of the Arctic Circle, on the Norwegian coast. I came out to, I swapped out with another EG&G crew who were maintaining a station there. Actually, it was a trailer parked up on a hilltop. And Don Westervelt, who got this program started, had just left country. He got in an argument with one of the Norwegian generals and was invited to leave. So another scientist from Los Alamos came out, Sid Stone. So the two of us spent the next 6 weeks waiting to see if the Russians were going to do a high altitude test, which they never did. So when testing resumed, I was in Norway rather than at the test site.
That is, wow, I did not know how expansive it got. So whenever they talk about like atmospheric testing or testing out in space, is that how EG&G got involved with NASA, or was it a different project?
Oh, that was different. That was a different project.
Oh, okay. That I was looking up EG&G's, their contracts a little bit and saw NASA. And I was like, that's really interesting, seeing how it kind of delved in from there. Are there any questions are you comfortable with the questions? Are there any things that?
No, I'm comfortable. Yeah, whatever you want to. If I don't want to answer something, I'll let you know.
Okay, definitely. And I know that you brought your envelope with you. Is
That
there
was just that write-up I did on EG&G, in case you didn't see it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so,
Your book was really informative.
okay.
It gave me a lot of information that I still can't wrap my head around a lot of what the test site was doing. So it was really good, though. Very, very well written.
I was, the group that I supported at Los Alamos, J10, was, like I said, was more involved, more interested in high altitude phenomena. But I did do one extensive experiment at the test site. It was on the event UMBA. I spent about a year building equipment for the test, and I spent 3 months out of Area 3 supporting UMBA. What UMBA was it was an underground test, but they had a satellite in a chamber in the line of sight, and the lab group got them to build an air chamber above the satellite, and we were going to look at the X-rays coming through the air chamber to measure the fluorescence phenomena. So I built all these telescopes and things. We had a station that was sitting up on a hill looking at this window on this tower before the whole thing collapsed after the vent went off.
My name is Amanda Haas. I'm an intern with the National Atomic Testing Museum, part of the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation in Las Vegas, Nevada. I am here with Dr. Peter Zavattaro.
No, it's just Mr.
Zavattaro. Thank you so much. And how do you spell your name?
Z like in zebra, A, V like in Victor, Attaro.
And do you prefer to go by Mr. Zavattaro?
Peter's
Peter?
fine.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. What is your position with the museum, the National Atomic Testing Museum?
Well, I'm one of the founding trustees.
That's incredible. How long have you been with the test with the museum since its founding?
Since its founding, yes.
What year was that?
Gee, 05 was it?
Wow.
Testing my memory.
And do you like your position here? What's your favorite part? With your
It's just seeing the things that I'm very familiar with along my 35-year career in the test program.
Oh, wow. 35 years, that's a long time. Where did you start your career?
Well, I started back in Boston with EG&G back in 1959, and it was during the moratorium. So it was EG&G was dealing with the downsizing of their programs because of no longer testing. And the group that had hired me was interested in seeing if any of the instrumentation used in the test program could be converted into commercial products, which was not a very successful venture at the time.
Interesting.
Fortunately, scientists from Los Alamos, Don Westervelt, pursued this program called Vela, where looking at the premise was that the Russians may try to test in outer space, and we pursued developing a system that could detect any violations along those lines. And so we had built this system, many copies, and deployed it worldwide, and we manned it around the world for the laboratory. The premise of the system was that a nuclear explosion in outer space, X-rays from the explosion would impinge on the atmosphere and cause a fluorescence of nitrogen. So we were detecting the fluorescence of nitrogen as a telltale sign of a test in outer space.
Was nitrogen a common element to find with atomic testing or nuclear testing?
Well, it was something, there was never a test in outer space, so this was all theoretical. If you happened to have been in Hawaii in early July 1962, when we fired starfish, the fluorescence from starfish illuminated the night sky over the entire Pacific Ocean. So it's a very, very observable phenomena, it turned out, more stronger than we anticipated when they were thinking about that as a possible detection form.
That is fascinating. Did you have any similar experiments on the Nevada test site?
Well, we did one experiment at the Nevada test site along those lines, and it was an underground shot that had a line of sight to the surface, and there was a satellite in the path, which was the purpose of the line of sight. The experimenters put in a chamber window with a window in it to see if as the X-rays passed through the chamber to measure the fluorescence, looking at the conversion efficiency of the fluorescence, and I had an experiment to observe that chamber.
Wow, that's incredible. Can you give a little bit more emphasis on how the chambers and the underground testing with the instruments worked?
Well, what we had was, like I said, this window, and we had air in the window in the chamber to assimilate high altitude, and I had 3 huge telescopes, 20-inch diameter mirrored telescopes, looking at this window with high-speed electromagnetic cameras to measure the fluorescence, both in normal spectrum and into wavelengths of interest where the fluorescence would occur.
Okay, that's a lot of science that I feel like I need to start studying a little bit more. How long did you work on site at the Nevada test site?
Well, this was my one major experiment at the test site in all the years that I worked for EG&G. Most of my work was in the Pacific. So, unfortunately, the other experience at the test site was more from a management standpoint, not an experimental standpoint.
Oh, okay. That is fascinating. Were you able to move up pretty quickly from your experiments into the managerial position?
Well, turns out, let's see, I became general manager in 1983. Prior to that, I was a program manager and a deputy manager. And so I was in the management chain from about the mid-'70s.
That's fascinating. How was that change from up into managerial positions?
Well, I enjoyed working with equipment and experiments. Management is just the end product of your career, I guess.
So it was more like a sum of the means that from all of your
Right.
work. Okay. And you said that you worked for EG&G, the contractor. Did you work for any other contractors or with
No,
any
it
others?
was totally EG&G from beginning to end.
Okay. Were the contractors from a managerial position? Did you work with any of the other contractors on experiments or projects?
Well, my main association was with Los Alamos, so I worked very closely with both the scientists and the management of Los Alamos over the years.
Okay. Did they work a lot into the Nevada test site? Did you guys have a good relationship with each other?
Oh, great relationship. Like I said earlier, most of my work was with a group called J10, and their interest was in high altitude phenomena. So that's why we were very much involved in Operation Dominic and looking at the high altitude shots in the Pacific.
Okay. And What area was EG&G and your work in on the Nevada test site?
Well, we did diagnostics. We did experiments looking at the parameters of a nuclear explosion. So it was we were the primary diagnostic contractor for
Okay.
the test site and the Pacific. EG&G was involved in every nuclear explosion except I think two or three shots in the Atlantic, high altitude shots in the Atlantic, rocket shots that had no diagnostics on it.
That is impressive. So was EG&G throughout the whole site, or did they have their specific areas?
We were throughout the whole site. We were the diagnostic contractor.
Okay. What was your first impression of the Nevada test site?
I loved it. when like I said, it was out there for a 3-month stretch on this one experiment, and lived at the site basically because we were doing an optical experiment, so most of our work was at night. So we basically lived at the site.
Were you in Mercury?
Yeah.
How did you feel? What were the facilities like in Mercury?
They were austere, to say the least, but quite adequate. It was comfortable. We were working so much that it was just a matter of having a place to get a few hours rest at night after we were finished working, setting up.
Was the bowling alley and the pool still there when you were down
Yeah,
there?
yeah. Though I didn't use it much. Working too much.
Definitely. How was working at night? I mean, that must have been a unique experience being out in the Nevada desert. And
No, it was fine.
did you see any animals out there when you guys were
Not too many. A few coyotes, but that's about it.
Were there any bothersome, or did they just avoid you?
They minded their own business.
Okay. When you first stayed in Mercury, did you decide to move out to Las Vegas permanently?
At that time, I was the way EG&G was set up. We were doing all our support from Boston.
Oh, okay.
So we had a small group at Las Vegas for EG&G, but a lot of the support came directly from Boston until 1970. In 1970, we basically moved out the support that was set, the part of EG&G that was supporting the test program moved out west, either to Los Alamos, San Ramon, or Las Vegas. So it was a big migration in 1970 of EG&G.
Oh, wow. Could you tell that there was a big migration with EG&G people?
Oh, yeah.
Employees?
I brought out 15 families to Los Alamos, and this was, people that have lived in Boston all their lives, uprooted, and we set up, the office that I set up was in Los Alamos, so originally there was a small group of 3 or 4 people there, and we brought in like 150 people to Los Alamos to support the lab.
Was that during the time that you started taking on managerial positions?
Yeah, well, I was a department manager at the time, the engineering department manager.
Did you have to arrange for those families to come out?
Yes, it was a interesting process.
Can you give a little bit more emphasis on that?
Well,
That's fascinating.
we were talking about people that lived all their lives in Boston. So there was some family breakups because of the move that you would expect. So people change.
The Wild West, right?
Right, the Wild West. But I have still some friends that live in Los Alamos today that I brought out that are still alive.
That's incredible. How did you adjust to moving out from?
Well, I loved
the
it.
East
I
Coast?
loved. I had the place I had in Los Alamos was great, and a lot to do there, other than Boston was a nice place to live also. So, and I've always had nice places to live. I can't complain. Now I'm in Las Vegas.
How was life in Las Vegas coming out when you did?
Well, I was coming out, like I said, for the in the '60s for tests, and it was an interesting place then. The casinos were run by the more of a unsavory element of the world, I guess.
Certain organizations.
It was a great time.
Was it much of a break from Boston, like culturally?
Oh yes. Boston is a very academic, peaceful, quiet place. Very nice place to live.
And then coming out here where it's a little bit more boisterous.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And you said that you adjusted well to it, and so you're still here. Have you seen any changes that were a little unique to your experience?
Not that I can. Nothing strikes me along those lines.
Okay. How did you come to find employment with EG&G?
Well, this was right out of in college. You have those traditional companies come in and interview people, and I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do. And some guys from EG&G came out and interviewed me and 3 or 4 other people that they made offers to, and we all accepted. So it was, I had no idea what they did or where I was going. So I was living in New Jersey and moved to Boston.
Oh, wow. What was your first position with
I was
EG&G?
a junior engineer, right out of school. I was just, didn't know very much at the time. So.
Was engineering always an interest of yours?
Yes.
What kind of engineering?
Well, I was interested in optics, so I did a lot of work with cameras and photoelectric devices.
Okay. Were you able to see that passion, that drive kind of come through your career?
Oh yeah. Well, EG&G was very much involved in photography and high-speed photography and things like that. When I was first hired, I even had an opportunity to work with Doc Edgerton, one of the founders, and we would go off doing I would get it lent to him because he was out of the actual operations of the company at the time. So I'd be lent to him to do his little experiments that he liked to do with optics.
How was that? How was working with Doc Edgerton?
It was a ball. It was like one of the things we did once was we built a gadget to flip a mealworm in the air, sync to a strobe light. And a friend of his in Cambridge had a huge bat enclosure in his backyard, and we spent an evening photographing bats catching mealworms.
Wow, that's incredible. Was that a typical experiment that you guys?
Well, he was interested in high-speed photography and did with things with hummingbirds and all kinds of animals.
Oh wow! So almost like enmeshing the natural world with.
Right, and his theme was seeing the unseen with high-speed photography.
That is a really good, almost like not a logo, but like a mantra.
Yeah.
Were you able to see those relationships that you developed with Doc Edgerton through fruition with your work at the test site?
Well, he certainly stimulated my interest in high-speed photography, which was one of the things that I did quite a bit of.
Were you able to participate with some of the experiments once you were in a managerial position?
A few. You get separated out and from the actual working of things when you're a manager.
Did you miss that part of your?
Oh yeah, I enjoyed doing physical things.
Has that always been a part of your life to kind of be involved in the experiments more than overseeing?
Well, once you get into the management chain, you sort of get tied down with paperwork and keeping people busy and doing things.
Okay. Do you see that as with your involvement with the museum and the historical foundation, do you see that kind of part of yourself kind of come back and share your experiences, come back alive a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. It's good to see the old equipment and the things that we did, and talk to people about it, and reminisce about the old days.
What's one of your favorite memories on the site?
My favorite memory on the site, well, it was like I told you earlier, I spent three months there doing an experiment umber, so that involvement was my key experience.
And it followed through with the rest of your career.
Yeah.
Let me see. Did you have any unique visitors come on site?
Not that I can recall.
Did you have any interactions with other contract employees?
Oh yeah, we all worked together. We worked as a family, you know. Rico, the labs, all three labs, Sandia, Livermore, and Los Alamos. I worked with people at all three labs, and all the contractors. We had a very close working relationship. It was a very unique situation at the test site that people talk about to this day. It's very unusual.
Was it due to a common goal?
Yes, I think that was the driving force. We were working quite a bit, and very intense work and important work, and it kept us together. We didn't get diverted too much.
That's incredible. Do you still have some of the relationships with?
Oh yeah, we go to lunch every week, a whole bunch of guys from the test site.
That's nice. Whereas there any kind of, I've heard that there was a little bit of rivalry between Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos. Did you guys ever see?
Oh yeah, you know, we were deeply involved because I had an organization that supported Los Alamos and another organization that supported Livermore, and we all worked together. We were kind of like a melding point for the two labs to trade off ideas and things, so that the labs didn't have to get involved personally. So we helped that relationship quite a bit.
Was it almost like a facilitator from the site? Were you guys able to facilitate a good working relationship between the two?
Yeah, we traded a lot of ideas between the two on the EG&G level that the labs benefited from.
Interesting. And with your time with EG&G, did you see any turns with atomic or nuclear testing that's very interesting for us to better understand the history of the Nevada test site?
I didn't understand the question.
Seeing the changes within EG&G, was there any significant events or changes to help us learn better about the history of the site? Like the switching from atmospheric to underground testing? Or even...
Well, it all sort of went along in a very logical, evolutionary way. You know, when we could no longer test in outer space, in the atmosphere, we tested underground, and it was some of the experiments that we did in the atmosphere, we figured out how to do underground, so we could get the same kind of technology. And it was always developing what we needed to develop to get the data that we wanted to get.
Was it almost seamless, would you say?
From my perspective, it was.
Was there any events that kind of impacted operations on site?
Such as?
Any moratoriums, any sanctions?
Well, there was always the political side of the issue, and it was always changes in the management in the Department of Energy, and so we had to, deal with those changes along the way.
Were some of those changes harder or easier?
Yeah, they just sort of worked themselves out.
It's a good way to come about it. With the changes, did you have to facilitate any kind of changes from, let's say, the DOE? If they made any changes, did you have to make any changes to your?
Oh, there was always conflicts and things. It was even, I'll tell you one interesting event in the 70s. Los Alamos wanted to absorb EG&G. They wanted to, instead of having, we were a contractor, the lab was a contractor, separate, and it was managed by the Department of Energy. There was a time that the lab decided that they should integrate EG&G into their own organization, and I was offered a position as a group leader at the lab, and I would have this group, and there was all kinds of political maneuvering going on. This was in the 70s, and eventually it didn't work out. We stayed the way we were, so which was probably beneficial.
Was the switching between contractors versus governmental agencies, did that become more tenuous, or was there tension at some times to compete for contracts?
Well, that was the issue. We would get our funding directly from the Department of Energy. The lab would get their funding directly. And the issue that the lab pursued was they didn't like that. They wanted all the funding and decide how it should get split up. So it was more of a funding conflict rather than a technical work conflict. So they made an effort to do that, and it didn't succeed. So we went back to the way we always were, and it was all forgotten, and things returned to normal, and there was basically no problem from the event, other than the memories.
Did some of these events and funding challenges, do they come very often, or was it kind of more like
every year?
Every year
We'd worry about the funding and what we'd do and what the programs were. There was always the traditional annual event, trying to figure out what the future held.
Was it a very tense time whenever you guys had to?
Well, since it happened every year, you get used to it, I guess.
Was it dealing with those kinds of problems, was it a big shift from your original work?
Well, my original work was doing experiments, which is pretty much matter of fact, direct kind of activity, and management is a different situation. So it was a change from doing experiments where you're not particularly burdened by the politics to worrying about the politics and management.
Did they give you any kind of training moving from the experimental side to the managerial side?
No, it just sort of evolved.
Was it a lot of learning on the fly?
Yes.
It's fascinating. Let me see. Is there any other information regarding EG&G with its history? I've been looking into it and seeing its unique history. Is there any different projects that they conducted on the Nevada test site that most of us would not know of or be familiar with?
Well, we had the emergency response activity. We were responsible for that, the NEST program.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a major part of EG&G's effort. We had a major facility out. We eventually built it out by Nellis Air Force Base to support. And we had aircraft that would do surveys, and we would do preparation to deal with any nuclear accidents or events. So we had that capability within EG&G also.
Oh, wow. Did you see the site grow or shrink during your
Well, it grew
tenure?
quite a bit.
Was it like a sight to behold whenever you saw the staging?
It was major activity. Not only in Nevada, in the Pacific. We had a major activity in the Pacific. We had 3 aircraft. Each lab had their own aircraft. They were NC-135 aircraft, and they were all specially instrumented. Because after the testing program in Dominic, what the labs wanted to do was have the ability to be able to test anywhere. So the experience of doing the Dominic program, where we were tied down to certain areas to do tests, they wanted to have a mobile testing capability. So we developed 3 aircraft, KC-135s, that were instrumented. And the concept was that a drop plane could fly, and we'd find a place in the Pacific where there was good weather, and the bomb would be deployed. The 3 aircraft would collect the data from the event. So it was, so this was conceptual. We never did this, then we had the moratorium for no more atmospheric testing. So that whole capability was mothballed. Basically, we always had the capability in case we had to resume testing. But it was we got involved in doing atmospheric experiments. Not nuclear experiments, but things with thermite releases and natural phenomena. We went on solar eclipses and things like that.
Oh, wow. Were you able to witness many of these tests?
Quite a few. I spent almost a year out in the Pacific. I was on the aircraft for the early part of the Pacific. There was also a stint of 46 days I was on a ship anchored off Johnston Island for the events that we were doing down there, both high altitude and atmospheric shots off Johnston Island.
Oh, wow. So comparing to atmospheric testing, was it a different experience than witnessing an underground test?
Quite a bit. Most of my experience with the atmospheric test was on the aircraft, and we would fly in a position to collect the data. And once the event would go off, we'd turn tail and try to beat the shock wave away.
Oh, wow.
So we would just everybody would calculate when we'd think we'd get hit by the shock wave as we were hightailing it out.
Did you have any similar experiences with underground testing, or was it a little bit more, how would I put this? A little bit more formal, or,
Well, underground testing was more contained, so you just didn't have it wasn't quite as the ground would shake. On the one experiment that I was on, I went in on recovery, and since it had a line of sight to the surface, there was some venting, so it was a vented event.
Oh, wow. How was seeing the vent experience, or the vent event? Sorry.
Well, you don't see anything. There's just radiation that you have to be careful of.
Oh, okay. To tell our future researchers and viewers, is there a difference in seeing the atmospheric radiation versus underground radiation experience? Is that very different, or is it kind of the same concerns?
Oh, it's much different. The atmospheric, very few people are still alive that have seen atmospheric tests, unfortunately.
That's true.
It was a totally different experience.
Do you see it kind of seeing these experiences come through from interaction experiences that you received at the Nevada test site versus at Los Alamos very different? Was it a different experience between, like, culturally speaking?
Definitely different cultural experience. When I worked at Los Alamos, it was more of a planning laboratory kind of thing. We did a lot and analysis. We were responsible for a lot of the analysis work of the events that took place during Dominic. So that was a big, major effort for us at Los Alamos. But in Nevada, it was more hands-on experiment.
Okay. With your experience in the Nevada test site, did you commute from Las Vegas? Did you live on site once you permanently moved here?
Oh, I never lived on site at the test site except for when I was doing that one experiment.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the time I lived in Las Vegas.
Did you use the buses? Did you drive?
I drove.
How was the drive?
Very good.
I've heard that the road was also known as the Widowmaker.
Right, yeah.
Was it a common occurrence, unfortunately?
Not as not that I didn't have any experience with that, and didn't know anyone that was killed or hurt.
Oh, okay. With your commuting, did it make for long days? What was your schedule like usually?
When I was doing an experiment at the test site, we were there, all week, and we'd come into town for the weekends, and it was driving a GSA car back and forth.
Okay. And
So I had my house in Las Vegas. Not that when I was doing my experiment, we just stay at a hotel.
was it a pretty common experience to see other people working on their experiments?
Yeah, we'd
work out
take
there?
over some small hotels in town. We were mostly test site people, EG&G people, because we were the ones that were primarily from out of town.
Okay. Was that out towards Beatty that you guys would go out, stay out towards Beatty?
No,
or
we
towards...
would stay in town.
Oh, okay.
In Las Vegas.
Oh, okay, okay. Sorry, I needed to get my own clarification. What was the security clearance process like?
Well, let's see, I got my Q clearance a few months after I hired on, so like in 1960, and had it until I retired. So it was just...
Were there security differences throughout your career that...
It was always the same. Q is equivalent to the military top secret, and that covered us for whatever we wanted to do.
Okay. Did you see any differences in how security was perceived from your beginning in the 1960s until your retirement?
It was always well managed. It was not an issue. Everybody understood what the situation was.
Did you see any, were there any rumors of breaches or?
No. I don't recall any.
Oh, okay. Were there any unique rumors towards the test site? Any funny ones?
Not that I can recall.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I've heard things here and there, and the folklore of the test site's always interesting to see different perspectives. Was there any specific family or personal stories that you had on the site that would better help educate our researchers or visitors?
Not that I can think of. It's just normal life, more or less.
Okay. Is there any other information you would like to share with us today on your experiences or career?
I think we
EG&G?
covered everything I was interested in talking about.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you again, Mr. Peter Zavattaro. Can you spell your name one more time?
Okay, Z like in zebra, A, V like in Victor, A-T-T-A-R-O.
Great. Thank you so much, and
Okay.
thank you again for your time.
Oh, I hope it was helpful.
Definitely. Thank you.